All right, we're live. Sorry for the little delay, just waiting on the printer to get our lessons printed, and we were going over some of the church business stuff. So get your Bibles ready to go. We're going to be in 2 Kings tonight. And I apologize for not really being ahead of y'all on letting you know or giving you a heads up of where we're going to be. Tonight was chapters 4 and 5. And I'd like to tell you that next week will be chapters 6. Let me get there real quick. I don't have this with me on hand, but 6, 7, and I believe 8. So it's 3 chapters next week, just so you'll have a heads up there. But tonight, chapters 4 and 5. 3 pages. And there are familiar stories in this reading. How many of you read ahead any, not knowing probably what we were going to, because Mom asked, well, what are we studying tonight? But how many of you did read ahead and are familiar with this story, these stories that were coming out of these 2 chapters? Anybody read chapters 4 and 5? If you didn't, you probably have heard of these stories, right? These are familiar stories. So, and I'm going to need one myself so I can track through that. Get one. Yeah, he'll give me one. Thank you, Jeff. Isn't Jeff doing a great job? He deserves a hug, doesn't he? A hug?
Bring it in.
Bring it in. Jeff's a good guy. I tell you what. Don't know what I would do without him. Jeff Byers, everybody. Now, he's in my phone as Jeff Bites, but it was a typo. But I thought, I think I'll just leave it in the phone as that, because we pick on each other. We're both bus drivers. See each other every morning, don't we? And if you didn't know this about Jeff, he and I both are fans of plaid. I'm surprised you're not wearing plaid. He's usually wearing school spirits. Oh, you're wearing OU stuff. What is wrong with you, huh? I should have worn purple tonight, just because OU has problems with purple. Have y'all noticed that? Kansas State and TCU, both purple. I think I'm going to start wearing more purple these days. But usually he's always in plaid or I'm in plaid. We both shop at the same place, Walmart. Hey, I'm not into fancy brand labels, and Walmart's okay with me. Okay. Things of Grave Concern is the name I have given to tonight's session. This is session 15. Are you enjoying the Kings, the study? Okay. All right, here's the chapter 4 summary. One from the company of prophets has died, but his widow approaches Elisha, the man of God, and is asking for help. In chapter 4, verse 1, she says this: "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves." So what do we know? There's debt involved, right? That's what we know. Elisha offers help and then asks, what do you have? Or what did she have? And she had a little oil, right? She says, I've got a small jar of olive oil, and that's all that we've got. So Elisha instructs her to gather up as many empty jars from her neighbors as possible, specifically saying, don't ask for just a few, okay? And she collects the jars and goes into her house and shuts the door, just as Elisha tells her, and her boys, her sons, bring her the jars. And from that little jar of olive oil, she's able to fill up every single one of those jars. Fill them up. When she asked for another jar, one of the boys said, there are no more, and the oil stops flowing. So what we are witnessing is nothing less than a miracle, right? This is the never-ending oil. As long as you have the capacity to hold it, the oil would keep flowing. Then Elisha tells her to sell the oil to pay off her debts and then she and the boys can live on what's left over. Now, I don't know the price of oil, olive oil, in that day and time. But I do know that this story is closely related to a time frame and a place that's nearby that's in severe famine. Meaning that oil would probably have a precious price on it. If she had enough of that oil to pay off the debt and then live on the rest, that was substantial, wouldn't you think? That's pretty substantial. I also think it's important. I can't talk tonight. I also think it's pretty important that one of the things that we learn from this is Elisha says, take care of the debt first. Pay off your debts. The Bible says the borrower is slave to the lender. It's not wrong to borrow money, but it's important that you end up paying off what you borrow in as timely fashion as you can. The idea of borrowing or lending is actually supported throughout Scripture. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but Jesus, remember about the talents. He tells the one who had just the one talent, you should have put this out there in an account to bear interest. Then when I would have come back, I would have gained not just my talent back, but the interest of that talent. And what was the rate of interest? 100%. The 5 had the 10 and the 2 had the 4 and the 1 still had the 1. He's thinking, hey, I gave you back what you gave me. And the master's thinking, not really. You lost for me. You lost for me. You should have put this on interest. Well, anyway, that's another little story. But I think there's that financial obligation we can see in this. They're able to live on this leftover. Okay, then Elisha travels to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman urges him to stay with her for a meal. And he would come through that area a lot, and she asked her husband, hey, this is a man of God here. Why can't we build him a little room so that when he's here he can stay? And apparently, if you read between the lines, this would include his servant, well, I'm assuming as Gehazi at the time. We're not sure. I think it's the same servant. So it's him and a servant, right? And so the husband agrees to that. And one day he wants to kind of, while he's there, return the favor of the gesture. Hey, you're providing me this board, room and board, and what can I do for you? And he says, can I what did he ask? What verse am I in? Can he write letters? Where's this at? 14. Back before that. Can I speak on behalf to the king or the commander of the army? That's what he's asking. And she says, well, I have a home among my own people. So it's almost as if he turns to his servant and says, what can we do for her? And Gehazi points out, well, she has no son and her husband is old. In other words, prospects of her having the joys of motherhood are very slim. So he tells her that about this time next year she's going to have a son that she can hold in her arms. Isn't that neat? And she thinks what? Don't be pulling my leg now. Don't be misleading me. Because she's probably deducing the fact that my husband is old. Remember Sarah laughed? You know? When you think about things from the human reasoning and you're using human logic, there are certain things that God says that's going to sound ridiculous. Because from a man's perspective or a woman's perspective, it's impossible. Now, it might not have been impossible, but boy, it's highly unlikely. Have you seen my husband? You know, it could have been in that kind of a tone. But with God, all things are possible, right? All things are possible. So the next year, she has a son, just as the prophet said. Well, one day, this grew up into a child, but he's out in the field with his dad, and something happens where he says, "Oh, my head, my head." And the father says to his servant, "Quick, carry him to the boy's mother," and the boy's in her lap, and about noon, he died. She goes in and lays the boy on Elisha's bed, right? Then shuts the door. She asks her husband, "Give me a donkey and a servant. I'm going to go after the man of God." And he says, "Why? It's not the new moon or a Sabbath." And she basically says, "Shut up and do what I tell." No, she didn't say that. But she does insist, "I'm going to do this." Hey, can women be pretty persistent? Oh, yeah, She's going to do this thing, isn't she? She finds Elisha where? Mount Carmel, right? So goes out to Mount Carmel. Elisha sees her in the distance, sends Gehazi, "Hey, find out what's wrong. She's coming. Is something wrong with her husband? Something wrong with the child?" And Gehazi goes out there and says, "Is something wrong? My master's worried." And she says what? Everything's all right. But then she keeps going to where Elisha is. And she comes up to Elisha, and this is what happens. Look at verse 27, 28. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She's in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord?" Now, I don't know what tone of voice she's using, but you can imagine. She said, "Didn't I tell you don't raise my hopes?" Okay. And then he sends Gehazi with his staff to run back to the boy, not to stop for anybody that wants to greet him. And Gehazi was to lay Elisha's staff on the boy's face. And Gehazi did what Elisha said, but there's no response from the boy. But when Elisha arrives, he does this. Verse 32. He reaches the house. There was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and lay on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out on him, the boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned away and walked back forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched on him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. So the boy comes to life. Elisha tells Gehazi, "Call his mother." She comes in, falls at his feet, bowing to the ground, takes her son out. Then Elisha goes to Gilgal, where there's a famine. And Elisha instructs his servant to put on a large pot. Let's cook some stew for the company of prophets here. Well, one of the prophets goes out to help, gathering herbs. He sees a wild vine. There's all these gourds on it. He takes the gourds, brings them back. They're cut and put into the pot. The men start eating, and when they begin to eat, verse 40, "Man of God, there's death in the pot." So we are led to believe this is poisonous and can kill you. But, have you ever had something that probably wouldn't kill you, but you thought, "Man, this is bad"? He asks for flour. Flour's brought, he puts it in the pot, then everybody's able to eat, and there are no harmful effects. Okay? Then a man from Baal Shalisha came, bringing Elisha 20 loaves of barley bread. And he says, "Feed the men this bread." And the servant said, "Now wait a minute, there's 100 men. There's not enough." And Elisha assured them, "There will be enough." He says in verse 43, "Give it to the people to eat, for this is what the Lord says, they will eat and have some left over." And they ate, and there was bread left over. I don't know, 20 loaves of bread I thought could feed 100 people, but maybe these were small loaves. But obviously, both the miracle of the bread and of the oil was a miracle of expansion, kind of like the feeding of the 5,000 or the 4,000. Okay, that's chapter 4. Chapter 5. It's one of my favorite stories of the Bible. Oftentimes, when I am studying with somebody about obedience to the gospel, this is one that I come to a lot to show and demonstrate why it's necessary that we always follow to the detail every instruction God gives. Amen? You follow that. A commander of the army, this is for the army of the king of Aram. His name's Naaman. He's described, by the way, as a pretty important person. It says he was a great man in the sight of his master, highly regarded, and through him the Lord had given victory to Aram, and he was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Just like Aaron said, he had leprosy. What's leprosy? Leprosy is a very evident skin conditioned disease. It's actually a nervous system problem. And what the effects are is that the outer extremities begin to deteriorate, breaking down cartilage, and you can lose like your ears, your nose cartilage, and get down to where it's just flesh and bone. Your skin is being eaten away by this disease. Having been to India, I've been to leper colonies. I've been to one all 3 times I've been in the last 10 years, and I can tell you it's not a pretty sight. What a lot of people's conditions are in is shriveled up hands, or some are in such a condition that they've wrapped themselves so you can't see. Some people are carrying prosthesis because they've lost an arm or they've lost a leg or part of a foot. But the ones I've been to, they're members of the church. As a matter of fact, all 3 times I got to visit with the preacher who himself was a leper. And there at the end, I saw him just shortly before he died. I got to pray over him, and a great person. But it's a very degrading disease, and it's ostracizing you from community because you'd be colonized. You were not allowed to be in public society. As a matter of fact, there are Old Testament laws about leprosy, right? The people who had lepers were called what? Unclean. As a leper, we've read things like, as a leper, you had to give way for somebody who was coming down a road. You had to defer to let them have right of passage. And some will say lepers of Bible times would have to wear bells so you can hear them coming. Like if you were coming around the corner and you heard somebody with bells on, you knew, okay, there's a leper around. Or the leper would have to say, I'm unclean, letting you know, giving you warning and stepping off to the side that they were indeed unclean. This is what this army commander had, okay? But he's an Aramite. A young girl had been taken captive. Now, this is ironic because Naaman has been a commanding officer in the army for the king of Aram, going after people and capturing them. And this is one of the captive young girls that he placed in the service of his wife, Naaman's wife. And she says, oh, I wish that Naaman could see who? The prophet that lives in Samaria. And Naaman obviously finds out that, hey, maybe there's some help, because what she says is he can heal that guy of leprosy. So Naaman goes to his master, which is the king of Aram. And the king of Aram responds with this. He says this in chapter 5, beginning in verse 5. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. That's a lot. The letter that he took to I wonder if it was plaid from Walmart. I doubt it. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. Well, the king of Aram is probably not on the same page as that young captive servant girl, because he thinks, okay, yeah, I'll send you the king of Israel. And what's the king of Israel think? Well, he's saying in verse 7, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me? This is a trap. He's setting me up, in other words, right? This is a loaded request. Well, Elisha heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothing, because he had done that when he heard this, and sent him this message. This is at the ending of verse 8. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. Okay, so Naaman approached Elisha's house. Elisha sent out the message that Naaman was to dip in the Jordan River how many times? See, it's a familiar story. And his flesh would be healed. And Naaman said, okie dokie. No, he didn't. He's angry, and he left. One of his servants convinces him by saying, verse 11, this is Naaman. I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Now, there's a point that I meant to type into the bottom points that are always at the end of the lesson, but I didn't type this one in. But I want to make sure we make this point. God doesn't always do what you expect him to. That's the point. Wouldn't you agree? God doesn't always do what you expect him to, or how you expected him to do it. And he says, are not the Abana and Parfar rivers much cleaner than this Jordan? You know, the Jordan, have you seen pictures of it? Jimmy and Norma, you've been there. It wasn't a crystal clear brook, was it? Did it look like the Arkansas? Or Chakasky? You know, the Arkansas actually starts off pretty good. It's what's rolling through the Royal Gorge. You been to the Royal Gorge? It just picks up all that Kansas dirt before it comes to Oklahoma, right? And dumps into Call Lake. But that's that river. But yeah, why not be up there in Abana and Parfar at the top of the Fertile Crescent? That's where the fresh waters from the mountains of Turkey are coming down after they melt. Much clearer, right? So this is what Naaman's thinking. But it says he went off in a rage. But his servant convinces him, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times. The Hebrew word correlates to the Greek word baptizo. It's immersion, to dip. And the man of God had told him, as the man of God told him, and his flesh was restored and became that as a young boy's flesh. Okay, so there's a lot of miracles going on in these 2 chapters, aren't there? This is a very significant one. Okay, Naaman's response to Elisha in verse 15, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. Well, the prophet said, as surely as the Lord lives, I will not accept anything from you. He urges him, but Elisha continues to refuse. And then then Naaman makes this, what I call a strange request. Verse 17. If you will not, then please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. In other words, I've got to go back and do what I'm expected to do and do what I'm told, but I want you to know that I'm not really bowing down and worshiping that image. But when I do that, can I be forgiven of that? And apparently the reply that Elisha gives, go in peace, kind of means you'll be okay. I take it to mean that. That's kind of a strange request, isn't it? Gehazi thinks to himself, well, wait a minute, Elisha should have taken something. He was too easy on them and letting them go with that and not getting anything in return. So he takes it on himself to do what? He goes after Naaman, right? And says, hey, stop for a second. We, two young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. You got anything you could give them? A talent of silver, maybe 2 sets of clothing? Can you throw me a bone here? And of course, what does Gehazi do? Well, he takes some of that and puts it in his own house. Then he shows back up at Elisha's presence, and Elisha says, I know he was clearing his throat. Where have you been? And what's Gehazi say? I don't know what you're talking about. I ain't been anywhere. And then Elisha responds with this, verse 26. Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Now it's at this moment that I think Gehazi is thinking, I messed up. Oops. You work for the man of God who has divulged to him many things. You can't hide from him. And I just can imagine Gehazi's look as Elisha is telling him this. Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves, vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your what? Descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was what? Well, it wasn't like a boy's flesh, was it? It had become white as snow. All right. As always, I just kind of like to veer away from what I've got planned to talk about and just see what's off the cuff. How do y'all respond to chapters 4 and 5? Yes?
Well, in verse 35 or 4, or thereabout, 33, 35, it mentioned that the boy was, Elisha said, he didn't even know the boy was dead.
Right. He says, there's something wrong, but the Lord hasn't revealed it to me.
After that, he just sent his servants to Uzziah, to his boy.
Yeah.
He didn't ask the lady never revealed that the boy was dead.
Yeah.
So I guess that God didn't reveal it before that. He must have revealed it while she was in presence.
Yeah, he could tell that she was in distress, but he says, but the Lord's hidden it from me why she is. And then that just goes to show that a prophet doesn't presume anything. A real true prophet of God. Now, false prophets would, but true prophets of God are going to do, or they're going to say, thus saith the Lord. And he doesn't put anything out there if he doesn't know anything. God hadn't given him. It is interesting. That's a point to ponder. It sure is. A lot of interesting things going on there. Anybody else have anything?
In chapter 5, when he was approached, Naaman said, would I be forgiven for doing something? And he's going to go bow. And then, but his servant, though, so I guess my point would be, yeah, if you do something that your heart is not into it, you look forward to having forgiveness in your one. But then the servant went out and did something bad, and he wasn't forgiven.
Well, one is up front about, hey, I know that what I'm doing here is not going to be right or accepted by your God. And the servant's hoping he would hide it. Well, that's true. And it's interesting when you think about asking for future forgiveness. Because this, I think, was okay. I think what Elisha's response to him was, you're going to be okay with this. In other words, yes, you will be forgiven. But here's the danger thing, and I wouldn't make this as a point that here's the verse that bothers me. Therefore, this is going to come out King James. Therefore, he that knoweth to do the good, but doeth it not, to him it will be sin. You remember this? James 4:17? I think it's 4:17, isn't it? Anybody that knows to do the good, but does not do it, to him it is sin. In other words, you can't get forgiveness for doing something. You can't get forgiveness ahead of time and then going through it and doing it. That's the point I'm making. As a matter of fact, Romans 6:1, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that God's grace may abound? God forbid, May it never be. You can't do that. That's kind of lending itself to the Catholic idea of indulgences. You remember indulgences? This is part of the problem Martin Luther had with Catholicism is they're selling out indulgences so you can get out of jail free before you get into jail. In other words, with God. You don't have to go see a priest right off the bat, get absolution. We'll give you absolution up front so then you can go out and sin. That's the part that I want to make sure we don't promote. Now, could a person, this is an interesting discussion, could any Christian find him or herself in a situation where they are being compelled to do something that they don't agree with, but they don't have much of a choice, but in their conscience between them and their God, can that still be okay? Praying to God, now God, I don't really believe this, but I have to do this. Is there ever a situation that you think a Christian may find him or herself in where that could be the case?
When you stand up before the judge or the bailiff or whoever, swear before God, I swear. Some people would prefer and do say affirm
because of the
Bible.
Right, what Jesus said, don't swear at all.
Would that be a case where you would be doing as a requirement for the law, even though I guess the judges or the bailiffs, they do the affirm affirmation.
Yeah.
So you're not caught doing it.
Yeah. Okay, if you're a pacifist, if you feel like I'm not feeling right or comfortable with bearing arms and going and fighting or whatever. And by the way, Churches of Christ, historically, there was a lot of people in Churches of Christ through its history that were not for, warfare, wartime. And there was a lot of advocacy for pacifism. And that can be, that could be one of those examples where, well, I'll go, but I don't want to bear arms. Give me something else, do something else to do that. Do you dodge the draft because of it? God's word kind of talks about the government authorities that are there or because God put them there. They don't wield the sword in vain, in other words. There's kind of an obligation there too. So I think there could be some situations where you might be like Naaman, who is saying, hey, I'm in this fix that I have to do this. But I think there's also those moments where, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're not going to bow down to that image. You've got to stand your ground on certain things. So it really depends on situations. Any other thoughts?
The similarities between a couple of things here in the New Testament. One was where he raised the boy from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Several instances of that. And then the feeding of the 120 loaves. I thought, well, that's kind of a fishy story. He had more with a few more loaves, a few less loaves.
Yeah. Maybe the loaves are not Wonder Bread loaves like I'm thinking of, But yeah, because how many slices are in a loaf of bread? Isn't there about 20 or so? If you got 5, that's 100 right there. Of course, who wants us to eat a slice of bread?
Bread down and good.
Huh?
It wasn't as good as I imagine it's a whole lot better.
Probably the bread they had back then was healthier than the one we have here today, I would think. I don't know. No offense to wheat farmers, by the way. Anybody else thoughts on either chapters 4 or 5? Mom, you're always good for some thoughts, but I see you got a baby. It said they got her from Israel? I know that the Aramean army was raiding and took captive people, and among them was this young girl. Yeah. I don't know if she's from, well, I guess you could kind of assume she's from Israel because she knew about the prophet in Samaria. Oh, it does say Israel, okay. Yeah. And there's irony there. Why would she want to help the enemy? And then why would King of Aram himself make the plea to the king of Israel? Well, right. Anybody else have any thoughts? Yes, Norma. Oh, yeah. I can get his point as to why he's wanting forgiveness, but why is it 2 donkeys worth of dirt that he can carry? Why is that a symbol or a sign? Well, why does the near kinsman of Ruth's dead husband give a shoe to Boaz as a sign? I don't know. There's a lot of tradition there about what's the shoe, what's the dirt, you know. That's kind of interesting. Could it be that, I don't know. I really don't even know how to answer that question, but it is something to ponder. I think I do have it on here to ponder. Anybody else? Questions to ponder. Why did the Shunammite woman place the boy on Elisha's bed? Maybe she thinks, well, he's the one that helped bring this boy to this world. Maybe he can bring life back this way. But she puts him on the bed, and obviously nothing happens. She shuts the door, goes to her husband. Why did the Shunammite woman's husband bring up that it wasn't the new moon or a Sabbath? Why are you going to go looking for the man of God right now? He knows the boy's dead. It might be the time that Elisha was one that was out and could be available.
She did know where he was.
Well, she, is at Mount Carmel where she finds him, and he's frequently there. Why did the woman tell Gehazi that everything was all right? Yeah, Gehazi, you're nothing to me right now. I'm going to go see that guy right over there, So that's just a way of kind of a smoke screen to, hey, I've got a journey to go on here.
Do you think that maybe she knew that Gehazi was maybe a little bit shady?
Well, obviously in the end, we know that now, but before, I don't know if we have any hint whatsoever that Gehazi was had any kind of ill will or any kind of but it could be. Why did Elisha tell Gehazi to lay the staff on the boy's face? Well, I don't know why I put this in here other than I thought that was interesting. And then the other interesting thing is how Elisha presents himself to the boy, which is the same way Elijah did to the Zarephath's woman's son. As a matter of fact, we'll look at that in a minute, back in 1 Kings 17. Why would the young captive girl want to help? Okay, we already did that. Why did the king of Israel think the king of Aram was trying to pick a quarrel with him? Yeah, what kind of request is this? That I heal your commanding officer. Why would I want to do that? Go ahead, Sam.
It's not clear where Israel is saying it's trying to start something.
Yeah, exactly. Tensions are high because, hey, first of all, you got that news from a young captive you took from us. We don't like your raiding band of Aramean armies coming through here getting us captive.
I don't feel you have an excuse to come and attack me.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm not going to give you more ammo. I'm not going to give the enemy ammo. Why is Naaman told to dip in the Jordan River 7 times? This is always interesting to me. Right. 7 seems to be a significant number. There's no question about that. Yes, Jennifer. 7 days. Yeah, well, maybe this is for Monday, this is for Tuesday, this is for... That might be a good thing. How was that Happy Day song? Sunday, Monday, happy days. That's a good point. 7 is a pretty particular number. It is a sign of completion or perfection, and it's the number for God. When you're studying Revelation, that's something to keep in mind, that there's something holy or sanctus about that number 7. 7 churches of Asia, the 7 spirits, he who holds the 7 stars in his right hand. And there's just all these times that you see this as representation of deity, God. The boy sneezed 7 times, which is totally unrelated to the Jordan River dip thing. But hey, it's 7 is there. That's right. That is interesting. Why does God say that the act of getting in water and allowing yourself to be lowered in and you holding your breath and then you raise back up is the culmination of when salvation occurs? Baptism. I have no idea. But if God said do it, you better do it. You got it, Karen. You better do it. What are obedience? Are there some other things God is ever, maybe not in a general way, like baptism's universal. I mean, this is an expectation God has for everybody, right? In New Testament times. Has there ever been other times that you can think of where God expected or asked for a thing to be done that you felt was bizarre or illogical even, but God expected it nonetheless? I don't know why, but I'm just thinking, I just heard a toilet flush. I was very glad. Did y'all hear that? That was an awkward moment. Well, moving on then. Yes, go ahead. Because bail me out of this thing.
I want to go back to James 4:17.
Okay.
And that's an interesting.
Yeah.
I'm reading out of the ESV. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him to sin. I would venture to say everybody's guilty of that.
Oh, yeah.
So how should I get out of that?
Well, so I remember back when I was a kid learning about sin first-handedly. There's sins of transgression, which are things you commit. In other words, don't do this, but you do it, and therefore you're crossing the line. That's what transgress means, by the way. It's crossing a line. Sin means missing the mark, but transgression is the idea of it being portrayed as you cross the line. Because there's egress, and transgress means you're but you're trespassing on other person's zone now. This is the sin of omission, the failure to do something. The failure to do something is just as sinful as the doing something that causes a sin, that is a sin. So I think of that as very indicting to me, because I don't know how you all feel about it, but I probably personally would think I probably have had more sins of omission than I have transgression. The failure to do something that I was expected to do that was the right thing to do, versus when I did wrong things and I knew I was doing it and it was wrong. I don't know, anybody else feel that way, that maybe there's more sins of omission in your life than there are transgression in your life? Not that it matters, sin is sin. Sam?
Well, what strikes me about that verse is intent. I go and I ask ahead of time to say, I know I'm going to do something, and do it whether I do it or not.
Yes. I'm glad you bring that up. Let's turn to Leviticus 5. I want to show you something to John here. This may or may not answer your question, but in Leviticus 5, when we're talking about the sacrificial system, very meticulous detail, and this is pretty laborious reading. I'm just going to be upfront. Leviticus is the most boring book of the Bible. Sorry, God. But it really is, it's like reading a city code or statutes from the Oklahoma statutes, law books, you know. But in Leviticus 5, look at the subheading that says guilt offering. This is verse 14. The Lord said to Moses, when anyone is unfaithful to the Lord by sinning, how? Unintentionally. In regard to any of the Lord's holy things, they are to bring, this is Leviticus 5, verse 14 and 15, they are to bring to the Lord as a penalty a ram from the flock, one without defect, of the proper value in silver, according to the sanctuary shekel. It is a guilt offering. They must make restitution for what they have failed to do. What they have failed to do, even though it was unintentional, right? What they have failed to do in regard to the holy things, pay an additional penalty of a fifth of its value and give it to the priest. So that's like court cost, right? Or administrative fees for what the priests are doing. The priest will make atonement for them with the ram as a guilt offering, and they will be forgiven. Now, hold on. Following that, you have this, verse 17. If anyone sins and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, and what's the rest of that say? Even though they do not know that they do it. There's a difference there. And the example, it follows with the same thing. But the example I would give, and I do this often, let's say your kid is driving down Main Street and he's with his buddies and they're just thinking it's fun to throw rocks out the window. And a rock, as they go by, bounces off the sidewalk and hits a window and shatters it or cracks it. Did the kid intend to do that? No. But he knew he did it. Oh. Right? And then the cop pulls him over by the time they get to Shepherd's, calls me up and says, hey, we caught the people that vandalized your church. But when he pulls the kid over, or the kid might have been in the back seat. Did you know that when you threw that rock, it broke a window in the church? Yes, officer, but I didn't mean to. Oh, you didn't mean to? Okay, things are okay. You just go on. I'm just giving you a warning. Is that what's going to happen? Restitution must be made. That's what that text said. Now let's say kid goes by, they're throwing rocks, and he doesn't know that a rock skipped up and hit the window. He gets pulled over in front of Shepherd's. I'm looking at my two boys because they're very much listening in on me right now. And the cop pulls him over and says, did you know that the rock you threw broke a window? Oh, I had no idea. Now they're either lying or they had no idea, right? Kevin would lie about it, right? Okay, he would tell the truth. I didn't know that. Is the cop going to say, oh, if you didn't know about it, then that's fine. Everything's okay. I'll talk to the preacher and I'm sure they're okay with it. Well, restitution still has to be made. So the difference is one knew about it, but it wasn't intentional, and the other didn't have a clue that that's what happened. But they're both guilty. Now, I'll go to Lee because you had a hand up. Okay. Does that answer John's, though? Because here's the thing I want to make up with the follow-up. I think all of us are guilty of sinning when we don't even know we did. How many of you ever had somebody come up to you and it was revealed to you either that towards them or somebody they knew that you had offended somebody by what you said and you had no clue that you had? And this person is now bringing it to your attention. Man, I had no clue.
What happens if you made that sin and nobody ever brought it to your attention?
Is God going to hold you liable for that?
Does this come under the umbrella of unforgivable sin?
No. Mm-mm. No, I think that sin's forgiven. I think this is where grace is. So when you say umbrella, let's think grace, not unforgivable sin. That's a big umbrella. God's grace is, we sing it, amazing. It's amazing. This is where grace is sufficient. I think grace works in that operation. Got 2 minutes left. Let's see what we've left out here. Why does Naaman ask for dirt? I don't know. That's discussion questions. What can we learn from the widow and her son's example of following Elisha's instructions? Well, they did everything he said, and they were able to live on that, right? I'm going to skip some of that. There was a comparison to the sons heating. Why do you lay down on a boy face to face, mouth to mouth, eye to eye? That happened. Elijah did it, and now Elisha does it. It must be in the prophet handbook somewhere. The standard operating procedure is, here's what you do when a lady's boy dies. Well, it did warm his body up, but I think we need to make sure we realize he was dead, not just passed out or in a shock. Yeah. Old-fashioned CPR, Jennifer?
Could it be so they could see each other's eyes when the boy comes in?
Well, that's a good point. If I was the boy and I open my eyes, I've got a man laying on me, I'm thinking, okay, this is strange. That would be awkward.
And you see somebody die,
Yeah, yeah. Now, I've got maybe another plausible answer as to why it's that way, and that is because Elijah was Elisha's mentor. And whether or not he saw or was even with Elijah in company during the time that happened in 1 Kings 17, because I'm not sure where Elisha comes in. I think it's after that. But if you follow your teacher around, you've probably read up on what your teacher's able to do and how he did things, and these stories are there. They're going around. And this is what he did, so this is what I'm going to do. Well, but then it didn't at first. And it says he's walking back and forth, pacing, and then he does it again. Yeah, okay. What was the second point in that SOP there of the standard operating procedure? I forgot. What was that point? Whatever it is going on, he's pacing back and forth, and he does it again. And of course, the boy sneezes 7 times, so. Three times? Okay. So that is interesting. Let's get to the bottom line on things to consider are like, here's the main points. We need to learn to ask for help. When the widow and her sons, 2 sons or sons, I don't know if we were told 2, but I think we were told 2. Anyway, Jesus said, ask and you will receive, seek and you'll find, knock and the door open. We need to ask. The Bible says, let us boldly approach the throne of grace, right? And he's inviting, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden. She's got something on her mind that's of grave concern, because what is her alternative? Selling her boys into slavery. Can you help me? Now, she doesn't actually say, can you help me? But she says, here's my plight. And then he says, how can I help you? Okay? God helps those who help themselves. Now, sometimes I struggle with this, because I also believe that God helps those who can't help themselves. Do y'all believe that? But I also think that if you pray for rain, well, if you pray for rain, what can you do? Start dancing? Doing the rain dance? I don't know. Maybe if you pray for rain, you better start taking the umbrella with you. Otherwise, do you believe it's going to rain? Maybe that's a poor example. We do need rain. Everybody start packing umbrellas, okay? Huh? Dig a footing? Oh, dig a footing. Yeah, dig a footing. Does that mean if you pray for rain, you need to just go ahead and dust that wheat in? It's tough. Faith is a battle. The struggle is real. I don't know what that means, but I would say God helps those who help themselves sometimes, and God helps those who can't help themselves most of the time. That's right. Don't say to somebody at a distance that needs something, be warm and well fed, without doing something. Be active. So yeah, you pray for your things that you've got to turn over to God. But then do everything you can to facilitate that. Okay? Sam.
No, it's just what God said. There's a big difference between not doing anything to help himself. Something happens to you where it's totally out of your control.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree there are some things that we get down to in life that happens where you've got nothing left to do but pray. That's all you got left. You tie a knot at the end of the rope and you hang on there and just wait and see what God's going to do. With God, a little can be a lot. That's what that widow's oil. That's what that widow's oil. Or the 20 loaves of bread. It's good to return favors. Now, what was I thinking of on that one? I think it's the fact Elisha is saying he's grateful for the room. What can I do to help you? Okay? Yeah. If somebody paid for your meal at a drive-thru, you could pass it forward, couldn't you? You could pay for, I don't know how that works, because how do you know what they ordered and there's not a tassel full of kids in that van behind you? I don't know what that is, but.
There was an incident where we were in the store years ago when we were younger, one child, and the wife was counting money. It looked like she didn't have enough yet. Didn't know how to buy everything, so we got to mine. We got to put our food. Woman said you owe 30 cents. Man up front heard her talk about money in the aisle somewhere. He paid for that. He didn't pay enough. She took 30 cents out of her box and said,
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. God can bring life to death situations. That's true of the widow's son. It's also true of death in the pot. Be careful who you send out grocery shopping for dinner. Had to get that one in there. Pick your gourds wisely. How many of you, what was the movie Clint Eastwood was in about the mushrooms? You remember that one? Where the little girl knew where the poisonous mushrooms were versus the good mushrooms. You don't remember that movie? What was that movie? They remade it recently. Oh, I'll come back to it. God's instructions must be followed all the way, not just part way. And those are my bottom line points for the lessons tonight. All right, I'll let you go. Thank you for spending a little extra time, but that was making up for the delay in our start. We'll see you next time. Signing off YouTube and Facebook.